I saw you speak years ago at a Steelers event.
Oh, but that was a long speech.
You had, okay. You help. I was like, oh,
All right, if you all could take your seats and we'll get started here in just a second. All right, well, welcome back to day 2 of our wonderful student convention. For those of you I haven't had, thank you, the pleasure of meeting yet, my name's Freeman Holly. I'm a 3L here at ASU Law. I also serve as the student convention chair, and in that capacity, I've had the great pleasure of helping to put together this event. So it's really gratifying to see you all here today. I also just want to extend a big thank you to the folks at ACS National, our distinguished guests and speakers, and of course, all of you in attendance for making this possible. It's now my great pleasure to welcome our next keynote speaker, Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes. Secretary Fontes has been on the front line of election administration issues these past few years in a state that's had the dubious distinction of originating some of the most well-known election controversies. Through all of that, he has been a strong voice in defense of the state's democratic institutions, beginning as Maricopa County Recorder, then as Deputy Pima County Recorder, and now as our Secretary of State. Secretary Fontes, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you very much to the American Constitution Society and to Arizona State University's Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. It's a distinct honor to be before you and try to do what I can to influence so many future leaders. And it's interesting to me, I'll just make note of this, groups like this, national organizations like this tend over time to create networks that have, and I should say can have, a significant impact in the way our nation moves, and that means the way our society acts. And so look forward to a lot of hard work, look forward to continuing this networking that you're doing this weekend. Those of you who are here, are we online as well? I think I heard somewhere that we might be. So to those of you out there in the digital world, also pay attention to your cohort as you all move through your careers. It's going to be important. You know, the first thing I wanted to say today was to express my gratitude for not just the invitation here and to the organization, but to the voters of Arizona. I think it was critically important, and so many people saw that the forces of democracy, the rule of law, and the constitutional order that we enjoy in this grand republic won out. But we're not out of the woods, not nearly. The folks who deny the outcome of elections, I don't like to call them election denialists. That's too politically correct for me. I like to call them fascists. And if they don't want to be called fascists, they need to stop acting like fascists. And we defeated them through no small effort. We defeated them through no narrowing of our paths. We were not ideologues. We did not exclude folks. In fact, we opened up the tent of democracy. And we joined with folks who sometimes we don't join with. We joined with folks in chambers of commerce. We joined with folks in the Federalist Society. We joined with folks across the United States of America who really appreciate democracy, because that was what was necessary to put down the threat that we face. And that threat is not gone. It's still around. They're still in our state houses. Some of them are in statewide elected offices. Many of them are in Congress, and they must be put down politically, of course. They must be voted out of office. They must be, I know, I get it, but that's real. And that leads me to the first thing that I wanted to tell you, and I actually have it written down right here. Please, please, please do not take yourselves so damn seriously, okay? We are engaged in an epic battle with global implications. There isn't enough hyperbole to talk about and to fully illustrate how serious this moment is in American democracy and the history of not just this republic, but across the globe. The influence we have is enormous. What we do matters, but we cannot take ourselves so seriously. We have to be big enough in our hearts and our minds as human beings to balance the interests. We have to be humane and human in this endeavor. Because at the end of the day, why is it that we're fighting this fight for democracy? We're fighting it for people. We're fighting it for poetry, music, kids on the playgrounds. We're fighting it for old folks who can peacefully remember greater days or lost loves. We're fighting it for those human things that keep us human. So let's never, never, never forget that. And in our serious work, we cannot take ourselves too seriously. Because when we take ourselves too seriously, we forget that we are human. We are fallible, and not a single one of us is going to get it right every single time. That kind of judgmentalism can be really problematic as we move forward. Now, what I really wanted to talk about today was the notion of our constitutional republic, the notion of the Constitution itself. And there's two words that I think symbolize the Constitution, the way Old Glory symbolizes this republic. Two words that stand out, that apply to the entire document and what it stands for, as amended, and even in its original form, as flawed as that may have been. Those two words are due process. Real easy. What does due process mean, however? It means that there are rules and there are ways that we have as a social contract and a political contract agreed to move through our society, to move through our lives, particularly our chosen profession. As an attorney myself, I've been where you're at. I've sat in these lecture halls. In fact, I heard at the University of Denver, my alma mater, the late Antonin Scalia spoke with us. I actually got a chance to ask him a question and he dodged it. I feel good about that. I feel really good about that. I feel really good about telling that story to you too. There was another justice of the Supreme Court that came and spoke to us, but I can't remember who it was because I'm really stuck on the fact that I stung Scalia and he didn't have an answer for it. But here's one thing I think that's really important, particularly as it pertains to that past justice and some of the other folks who look to our Constitution more as a bludgeon than as a tool for the greater good. And it takes me back to 1976. Not too many of you were around back then. In 1976, I was a 6-year-old boy in first grade. And I had this thing called an auto harp. How many of you know what an auto harp is? It's like a goofy little box-shaped guitar with a lot of strings. And you had some keys on one side and you'd push them and then you'd just strum the thing. It was very clumsy. It was a lot of fun. It was perfect for a first grader to learn how to play. And the song I learned how to play in 1976, when it looked like the revolutionaries, the ghosts of the Revolutionary War had just like thrown up bunting and flags and all kinds of, we had that quarter with that buffed out patriot on it. I don't know if you remember that. The song that I learned how to play is It's a Grand Old Flag. You're a grand old flag. You're a high flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart rings true under red, white, and blue. Now note, where there's never a boast or brag. But should all acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on that grand old flag. Where there's never a boast or brag. Why? Why is that important? Because when you are boasting or bragging, you are making it about you. You are not making it about the rules that should apply to everyone. You are making it about your preference, your victory, your political win, your ideology, your judgment. You're not making it about the rule of law and therefore due process. Where there's never a boast or brag was that humility, that grace, that gratitude that American leaders embodied, at least ideally, for so long. And it's a tiny little bit of poetry that I think the future really needs to pay attention to. Because even a big, annoying politician like me understands that in the execution of my duties, it can't be about me, because they're my duties that are important, not me. Sure, I'm going to go make political hay here and there. I've been known to do that once in a while, and I'm not ashamed of that. But I do know this. When I'm operating under oath and or under the color of my office, there ought never be a boast or a brag, because it's not about me. The Constitution stands for due process, and that due process means that the rule of law is supposed to apply to everyone all the time the same way. And it hasn't been that way in our history. It's certainly not that way now. Have we moved towards it and slowly started moving away from it in fits and starts throughout the entirety of our history as a republic? Yes. And this grand experiment is called an experiment because humanity's never seen the rule of law applied the way the American Republic has tried to apply it. In all generations, on all continents, forever, humanity has had two methods of moving one person into power and one person out of power. Those two methods were heredity or violence. That's it. And we came along and we decided, although it wasn't as big a we as it is now, we decided that we were going to have these processes called elections. And we were going to allow the people to choose who their leaders were going to be. And we hoped that the way the first president of the United States, George Washington, by the way, not the first presiding officer, never forget we had an Articles of Confederation before we had a Constitution. Always remember that y'all are going to be lawyers. Don't forget that. But the way he emulated Cincinnatus, by leaving office and saying, no, I'm not going to be a king. I didn't want to be a king. I'm going to go back to the farm. And his departure speech, which many of you have some recognition with because Lin-Manuel Miranda made it a part of our popular culture. Yes, I know, none of you knew of it before then. This is important because he didn't make it about him. He made it about us. He made it about the rule of law. He made it about due process. That is critical. It's almost like a humble submission to the notion that you're not as big as we, that you're not as big as us. And we have sad examples of people abusing that. One of them just got indicted. One of them was our Attorney General. Many of them still exist. Let me tell you a little bit about one of those issues and how it is that a lot of folks don't appreciate why that sort of an attitude is so dangerous. We have a county here in the southeastern corner of Arizona called Cochise County. Cochise County has a 2-to-1 Republican Board of Supervisors. The two really didn't like the fact that Arizona did not allow for a hand count of all the audits after the midterm election. And so they decided that they were going to do that in spite of the fact that their own lawyer, the county attorney, said that it was illegal to have a hand count. And everybody else in the state said it was illegal. But our former Attorney General decided to protect them and give them a hedge. And he issued an informal opinion through the Solicitor General's office, had a Deputy Solicitor General sign it. And the informal opinion said, yeah, well, maybe you can do it. Absolutely falling in opposition to the rule of law because the letter of the law flatly didn't allow for such a thing to happen. But now that insurance policy existed for these folks who would subvert the letter of the law, who would go against the law because of the conspiracy theories and their own bent towards American fascism, to have outcomes that they choose, not outcomes that their voters chose. And he gave them that little insurance policy, that little almost defensible hedge. Well, if the Attorney General and the Solicitor General gave us this opinion that it might be okay, we took that in good faith and said it might be okay ourselves. This is a direct example of the notion that the rule of law is under threat. And this American experiment away from heredity or violence being the way that we transfer power, that's critically important. And that was just a few months ago, folks. It wasn't that long ago. And that's why I'm saying to you now, A, be vigilant. Take good care of the fact that you need to know what the rule of law is by knowing what the law is, or at least knowing how to find it. And be applying it well, truly and faithfully, because if you apply it well and truly and faithfully, you're going to be right. Because at some stage, God willing and the creek don't rise, the courts will agree. That's a little bit of civic faith right there that we ought not lose. Because faith in each other as members of the same civilized society is what we really need to maintain. There's a couple of other tidbits that I wanted to leave you with that come directly out of the Constitution to help you to understand why it's important to be thorough and complete in your understanding of the subject matter that you deal with. Be very careful, be very wary when people come to you and say elections are a matter of state law. And you know they are. States run elections. States send their electors to the federal government. States send their congressmen and their senators to the federal government. And there will be people who will tell you the federal government should not be interfering in the administration of elections. Folks have heard that argument. I know all of you have heard that argument from your friends. Well, Article 1, Section 4 says the time, places, and manner of holding elections for senators, representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. We know that. There's a word that follows that after the semicolon, and that word is but. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators. And we know that there was a 19th Amendment later that altered some of that. Anyone who tells you that the federal government does not have a role in our elections has not read the Constitution. Take out your handy dandy little text, whether you got it from the League of Women Voters or from your own organization, and whap them in the forehead with it. Gently, of course, and with warning. You don't want to startle them. Some of those folks tend to get startled very easily. Let's go to one other part of the Constitution I think that a lot of people pay too much attention to, ignoring some other very critical parts of the Constitution. Now, I have a little bit of a reputation for talking about this a lot because I was a marksmanship instructor in the Marine Corps. And the Second Amendment is near and dear to my heart, but it's near and dear to my heart in the context of the rest of the Constitution. And people say, what does that mean, Fontes, the rest of the Constitution? Well, we all know what the text of the Second Amendment is. At least I hope we do, or at least we've heard it 100 times. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That makes all the sense in the world, doesn't it? No, of course it doesn't. What is a militia? How is it organized? Who runs it? Yeah, people can bear arms, sure, that shouldn't be infringed, but there's this whole extra stuff in there. And when my good friend, and I call him a good friend just for fun, Antonin Scalia, wrote the opinion in Heller, if you recall, there was a little bit of a hedge in that case. He wasn't absolute in his interpretation of the Second Amendment and the fact that everybody could have all the guns they wanted to all the time. And here's why. Because in Article 1, Section 8, subsections 15 and 16. If you're taking notes, I'll repeat that later. No, just kidding. Look it up yourself. We have a section that speaks to the Congress shall have the power. Congress shall have the power to levy taxes. Congress shall have the power to do this or that. And you'll excuse me from reading a little bit more, but I'm going to. Congress shall have the power to provide for the calling forth the militia, to execute the laws of the Union, to suppress insurrection and repel invasions. And then the next clause, Congress shall have the power to provide for the organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such parts of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. The militia is a federal law enforcement agency. And the Second Amendment capitalizes the word militia, and so do those other two clauses. So how in the world is it that I can be a militia of one under the Constitution of the United States of America? How in the world is it that the right to bear arms under the question of militia should apply to that AR-15 or any other weapon when Congress is supposed to buy that weapon? And me as a member of the militia, I'm supposed to be organized under the rules set forth by Congress, under the officers established by the several states. You see, some of our good friends will call themselves constitutional originalists, but they won't read the original Constitution. And you should approach that kind of willful ignorance with the indignity that it deserves. And you should stand up and champion the notion that those special interests who would put our own children at risk have zero justification in the very same document they will wave around and try to whack you in the forehead with as well. They're not right because they don't read. And their inhumanity comes from a kind of political tribalism that they've exploited to divide us one from another. And they do it under the auspices of who knows what kind of grand faith. Well, my faith lies in humanity. My faith lies in the future. My 3 teenage daughters, my faith lies in you. You who are the soon-to-be leaders, thought leaders, not just here, but across the country. Keep that faith. Keep your humanity. Don't take yourself too seriously, but be smarter, work harder, and don't be afraid on the occasional moment when absolutely necessary, either to whack them in the forehead or to kick them in the ass. The choice is yours. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions if you want. I'm not sure how much time we have for questions, but I'll take it. 5 minutes. Thank you, Alex. Don't worry. I just mean when I'm talking, not when I'm answering questions. Yes, sir. So the question was in 2022, we had some groups that were engaged in some voter intimidation. I'm assuming the folks that we had here in Arizona showing up to ballot drop boxes with long rifles and intimidating voters that were showing up. And what are we doing about it? Did I get it more or less right? Thank you. And Semper Fi to an alum of the United States Marine Corps up there. Well, first and foremost, we're working very closely with our friends in the legislature to try to insulate some of our election workers. You know, we've been sponsored by a couple of Republicans, some amendments on their election bills and some non-election bills to try to get election officials and election workers to have some anonymity in their addresses, to protect their addresses from the public record like we do for law enforcement officers, judicial officers, and the like. So there's some of that, at least for some of those folks. The other things that this administration, and I love talking about myself as if I'm some institution. The other thing that I've been doing is lobbying like crazy. I have a lot of folks in our congressional delegation and some other people in Washington, D.C. that I've been talking with about increasing penalties for folks who would threaten or harass voters and intimidate, threaten, or harass election workers. That kind of domestic terrorism cannot stand. And I call it domestic terrorism because that's what it is. The definition of terrorism, loosely, is the use or threat of violence to affect a political outcome. Well, guess what? If they're using threats or violence to affect a political outcome, they're terrorists. And if they don't like being called terrorists, they need to stop acting like terrorists. So we're doing that at the state and federal level. We're pushing for those sorts of changes in law. And frankly, I'm happy to say I even got a chance to go speak with general counsel in the West Wing and some other folks in the White House to ask them while they can't direct the Department of Justice really to do anything, to emphasize that as the Department of Justice moves forward with the prosecution of a lot of these folks who engaged in the January 6th insurrection, make those and other political prosecutions against the constitutional order, I should say, or those who would violate the constitutional order, make those a priority. Let's get some justice. Let's move these things forward so that the general public can understand that it's not just sport. And the First Amendment does have legitimate limitations. Like you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater, and there's really good reasons why. You can't lie about elections because of the negative impact that it has on the very democracy that upholds our constitutional republic. You just can't do it. So these are some of the things that I've been doing. And the rest of my administration has just been working hard to make sure we support the folks who are administering their elections, trying to go out there and get them people, get them resources so that they can do their jobs better at the county level. Because as you know, in Arizona, we don't actually run elections. We make sure that the folks who do have the resources they need. So thank you for that question. Yes, sir. In Moore v. Harper, help me out on the subject matter there.
Yeah, it's the state judicial branch notified regulations governing the manner of the election for senators and representatives. So basically, it's and a state legislation is kind of a problem.
Oh, the independent state legislature. What are we doing to prepare for it? You know what? There's not a hell of a lot that I can do about what the Supreme Court says, other than try my darndest. Let me switch from my Secretary of State hat to my politician hat real quick here for a second. You'll forgive me. We got to vote these sons of bitches out of office so that they won't mess with the way that we do things. I mean, it's really that simple, right? We can be genteel and intelligent all we want. But if we don't work like the Dickens, raise enough money and put good candidates out there on the ballots to make sure that they are going to abide by the rule of law and not try to overturn elections because that's what they feel like they need, right? It's the most snowflakey nonsense you've ever heard of. Just take your loss like everybody else does, right? I was at my kid's 7th grade softball game the other night. We got our asses handed to us. And you know what they did after the game? They bucked up, they walked out there and passed by the other team, slapped them high fives. They came back, go Lions, the Lady Lions, and off they go back to have some cheeseburgers or pizza or something. They took their losses better than, the guy that just got indicted. So what we're doing is what we can. And now that the Supreme Court has been stacked as much as it has, I don't know how good I feel about that, but the solution always comes down to the people. This is a political question, and politics at the end of the day rests on the will of the governed here in the United States of America. And hopefully we'll be able to do what we need to do. I will take one more question because I'm getting the high sign from Alex and he has to get me to something else here. Yes, sir.
Sir, previously as the county reporter, now that you've sealed the governor's office and the Secretary of State's office, I'm curious how your relationship with county reporters has transpired in sort of the past 4 months of you serving, and even how you see them going forward, especially with folks like Stephen Richard, who has actually, it seems like been pretty cooperative.
Oh yeah, we're like best buds now. Yeah, well, we get along famously. One other thing that I will point out, it's really kind of fun, and it's just an interesting thing I want to leave you with before I leave. I'm actually the acting governor right now because Katie Hobbs is out of state. So you guys got lucky. You got You got a governor, not just a simple little country secretary. Look, county recorders are just like everybody else, right? We're human beings. We have our opinions, we have our proclivities, we have our strengths and our weaknesses. We have our ways of being. And when I was the Maricopa County Recorder, I had the unique space of having, 62% of Arizona's voters under my jurisdiction, but there were 14 other county recorders that had the rest split up among them. We got along well, and I knew that we had a hell of a lot more resources than many of those counties had, right? I had 150 employees full time, and we would rack up to nearly 10,000 for an election. That's a lot to recruit and train all these people. There were several county recorders' offices. There's two, in fact, that the county recorder only has 2 employees total. Like there's 3 employees total in the office, including the elected. So there's an enormous difference between. So we would lend all the support we could and give them the respect they were due as an equal peer in the administration of elections, regardless of the volume of voters in Arizona that they took care of. Coming from the county, and by the way, I'm the first Secretary of State since Shumway back in the early 80s to actually have any experience running elections. Everybody else has come from the legislature. And you know how legislators are, right? They're like law students. They think they know everything. And the reality is they haven't spent any time doing anything. They're just like their faces are in books. And I'm picking fun at you guys. Relax. Remember the first thing, don't take yourself so damn seriously. Anyway, now my position comes from my experience. I get it. I understand what the Secretary's office's role is from their perspective. Their perspective, it's our perspective. They run elections. They select the polling places. They do the training of their poll workers and the recruitment thereof. They're the ones who have the equipment. They've got the warehouses. They've got everything. They're the ones that do all of the work. Our job is to bring them the resources and the training and the information they need so that we can have some standardization across the state, maintain integrity, and make sure that everything runs well for elections here. So our relationship is really good. And we've had so much turnover. Did you know that 10 of our 15 counties in Arizona have lost senior election officials in the last 14 months? 10 of our 15. That means 2/3 of our counties have lost one of the 2 senior election officials. That's an incredible brain drain. It's an enormous loss of experience. Some of them because they were just retiring, and some of them because they didn't like the idea that people poisoned their dog because they didn't like the outcome of elections. That's what I know, because I had not dissimilar experiences when I was the county recorder. So they've got an ally in me. They've got a supporter in me. And I will say this as a closer. First, again, thank you for having me out. Thank you for being so respectful. Thank you for laughing at least one of my jokes. It makes me feel real good. But more than that, thank you for giving me hope, because I look around and I see intelligent faces. I see questions that, like, I can't remember names of cases anymore. I'm too old for that. So apologize for that. But I'm very hopeful, right? And I was a 7-year-old kid when Star Wars first premiered in 1977. We had just gone through the bicentennial. And the one thing that whole expansive universe taught me was that there is hope. And as bad as it looks, as dark as it seems, we've had generations of struggle in this country. Just, you do not ever, ever, ever give up hope, because once you give up hope and despair wins, those bastards win. And we cannot let them. Our democracy is too important, because it really, really is the beacon for the rest of society, the rest of global civilization. And it's going to hinge on the work that you guys do. Don't forget it. And again, never, ever take yourself too seriously. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.